She opened the door to save a stranger's daughter, not knowing she was unlocking her own destiny. The wind howled like a creature in pain that night. Snow clawed at the windows of the tiny cabin nestled deep in the cold, hollow mountains of northern Vermont. Trees groaned beneath the weight of ice, and the power lines, already bowed, surrendered to the storm's fury hours ago. Inside, the silence was thick. Too thick for a 22-year-old girl to forget the weight of winter without a voice nearby. Claire Bennett sat close to the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees, her breath rising in ghostly plumes despite the fire. Her skin, pale and chapped from the cold, seemed almost translucent in the flickering light. She had not spoken to another soul in 4 days. Not since the last bus route was canceled. Not since the snow started falling and didn't stop. The cabin, her grandmother's old hunting lodge, was modest. 1 room, 2 chairs, a couch that doubled as a bed, and a kitchen barely big enough for one. But it was hers. After the funeral and the court hearings, after the reporters and the shame, she needed a place that asked nothing of her but presence. Claire had been a sophomore at Boston College, studying childhood development, when her world collapsed. Her mother, an ER nurse for nearly 2 decades, was named in a malpractice scandal so loud, so cruel, that it made headlines nationwide. A 6-year-old girl died after a misdiagnosed reaction. The hospital pinned the blame on human error, then named a scapegoat, her mother. The truth never stood a chance. The lawsuit, the protesters, the anonymous threats, then the bottle of pills. Claire never made it to junior year. Now, she lived here. She taught herself to sew curtains, to patch leaking pipes, to split firewood. She worked summers waitressing in town and cleaned Airbnbs during foliage season. She had nothing of her former life except 2 boxes and 1 unopened acceptance letter to Columbia's education program. She never threw it away. But she never looked inside either. That night, as the fire cracked and the wind screamed against the eaves, Claire was pulling her wool blanket tighter around her shoulders when she heard it. 3 knocks. Sharp. Hesitant. Close. She froze. In this part of the mountains, people didn't knock unless something was wrong, or unless they meant trouble. She rose slowly, grabbing the fire poker from its stand, her breath catching in her throat. The knocks came again, fainter now, as if the wind were stealing them away. "Back away from the door!" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No response, just the roar of snow. She took 2 steps closer. Then, through the frost-laced window pane, a shadow moved. "Please!" A man's voice came, muffled but urgent. "Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I just need shelter for my daughter." Daughter? Claire leaned toward the glass. Through the snow-smeared pane, she saw the blurry figure of a man, tall, hunched, carrying something wrapped in dark fabric. A small shape, trembling violently, her heart twisted. "Just 1 night," the voice pleaded again. "She's sick. Please." Claire hesitated. Every bone in her body screamed, "Don't." Her mother had once warned her, "It's not cruelty to be cautious, honey. It's survival." And yet, something about the desperation in his voice, not panicked, not performative, but quiet and breaking, reached inside her defenses. She glanced toward the fire, the extra quilt, the extra soup. She unlocked the bolt and opened the door 2 inches. Snow exploded inward like smoke. The man staggered, shielding the small bundle with his arms. His face was covered in frost, hair soaked, eyes red with cold. In his arms, a child, no more than 6, pressed her face into his chest, coughing weakly. "Get in," Claire said, stepping aside. "Thank you," the man rasped, breath fogging. He crossed the threshold, cradling the girl tightly. Claire slammed the door shut behind them and bolted it. "Sit near the fire," she said, keeping the poker in hand. "Don't touch anything else." The man obeyed without protest. He knelt by the hearth and gently laid the girl on the couch. Claire noticed how carefully he moved, like he had done this before, not in panic, but in practice. The girl's skin was pale beneath her flushed cheeks, and her cough rattled deep in her chest. Claire knelt nearby, her instincts taking over. "She have a fever?" she asked. "I think so. It started this morning. I tried to drive to Bar, but the road closed. Then the car died." He looked down. "I just kept walking." Claire studied him. 30, maybe younger. His jaw was dusted with snow melt stubble, and though his coat was designer, his boots were muddy and worn. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," he said. "And this is Lily. She's 6. Claire nodded once. "You're lucky I didn't have cell service. Most people would have called the cops." "You'd have been right to." There was something honest in the way he said it. No flattery, no explanation, just truth. Claire went to the kitchen, opened her emergency shelf, and returned with a battered can of chicken noodle soup. "I have this. And towels." He nodded. "Thank you." As she heated the soup, she heard him softly murmuring to Lily, brushing her hair from her face. Claire peeked over her shoulder. The tenderness was real, measured, familiar, like the man had been her whole world for a long time. "She's all I have," he said without looking up. Claire handed him a mug of soup. "Then keep her warm. I'll grab another blanket." She walked to the back closet, fingers grazing the top shelf where her grandmother's heirloom quilt sat folded. White cotton stitched with blue wildflowers. She never used it. Too precious. Too sacred. But tonight, something told her it was time. When she returned, Ethan was wiping Lily's forehead with a damp cloth, using one of Claire's good towels, folded just like she did. She paused in the doorway, her breath catching. He didn't know she was watching. She handed him the quilt. "It's clean," she said simply. Their fingers brushed. His were cold but steady. He looked at her then, really looked, and nodded once. "I won't forget this," he said softly. Claire didn't answer. She just sat down again by the fire, closer this time. Not out of trust, not yet, but something more dangerous. Curiosity. The fire crackled like an old friend clearing its throat. Claire stirred the embers gently, adding 2 more logs as the storm outside refused to yield. Snow lashed against the windows, and the wind whispered secrets through every crack in the cabin walls. But inside the world had gone quiet, save for the shallow, uneven breaths of a child asleep under her grandmother's quilt. Lily's cheeks were still flushed, her tiny chest rising and falling with effort. She looked more peaceful now, nestled against her father's coat. Claire sat nearby, legs tucked under her, cradling a mug of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, Ethan sat on the floor beside the couch, his back leaning against the armrest. He was still in his soaked boots, his coat half-zipped, like he hadn't dared relax since they arrived. "She's stable," Claire said softly, "but her cough's deep. She needs antibiotics. Flu, maybe bronchitis." Ethan nodded. "I know. I was hoping to get to my mother's house before it got worse. She's a retired nurse, 2 towns south of here." "And you thought driving through a Category 4 snowstorm was a good idea?" Claire asked, her voice sharp, but not cruel. "I didn't have many options," Ethan replied, eyes never leaving his daughter. "She was getting worse by the hour. I didn't know what else to do." Claire studied him. In the flicker of firelight, he looked worn, not just tired, but cracked, like a man carrying weight he'd long stopped naming. His clothes were expensive, but his posture wasn't. She knew that kind of exhaustion, the kind that settled in the bones. "Where's her mother?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. There was a long pause. Ethan didn't flinch, but something in his shoulders fell. "She passed away 2 years ago." Claire swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," he murmured, eyes glassy. "It was sudden. An accident. Lily was 4. She doesn't remember much, but she still asks about her sometimes." Claire glanced at the girl, a pang hitting her chest. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "She takes after her mom." Claire stood up and moved to the small kitchen, returning with a folded towel and a bowl of warm water. "Let me," she said, kneeling next to the couch. He hesitated, but nodded. She dipped the towel and gently pressed it against Lily's forehead. The girl stirred, coughed, then sighed. "She's burning up," Claire said quietly. "But her skin's dry. She might dehydrate." Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out a thermos. "There's ginger tea in here. I made it this morning." Claire lifted an eyebrow. "You made ginger tea?" He shrugged. "It's what her mom used to give her. I learned." She offered the thermos to Lily, holding it to her lips. The girl took a sip, eyes still closed. "She trusts you," Ethan said softly. Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. It had been years since someone said anything to her in that tone. Gentle, honest, without agenda. They sat in silence for a while, firelight painting their faces with gold and shadow. Outside, the storm had calmed slightly, the wind now a low moan instead of a scream. Claire noticed Ethan shiver. "Your clothes are soaked. You'll freeze." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. Take the couch when she's better. I have a cot in the back. Military issue. Uncomfortable enough to remind me I'm still alive." He smiled faintly. "You live here alone?" Claire paused. "Yeah." "Isn't it dangerous? So remote?" She shrugged. "Safer than where I came from." Ethan didn't press, but Claire could see the question in his eyes. She didn't owe him answers, but something in her wanted to speak, to be seen. "My mom died," she said, 3 years ago. She was a nurse like your mom. Only she got blamed for something she didn't do. A little girl died during her shift. It wasn't her fault. The hospital needed a scapegoat." Ethan didn't move. Not a flicker. "They ran her name through the mud," Claire continued, voice thinner now. She took her own life before the trial. I dropped out of school. Couldn't breathe in the city after that." Ethan's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. Claire stood abruptly. "Sorry. That was more than you needed to know." "No," he said. "Thank you." She turned to hide her face, suddenly embarrassed by her honesty. She hadn't told that story out loud in over a year. Ethan cleared his throat. "Claire." She faced him. He looked like he was about to say something else, but then shook his head. "Thank you for letting us in." She gave a small nod. "I don't usually open the door. I don't usually knock." A silence settled between them again, but this time it was different. Not strained, just quiet. As if the fire had taken the edge off everything, even grief. Later, When Lily began to breathe easier and the wind had faded to a whisper, Claire brought out two mismatched ceramic mugs filled with the last of her cocoa stash. They drank in silence. Claire stared into the flames, then whispered, "Just one night. When the storm clears, you both go." Ethan nodded. One night. But neither of them believed it. Not anymore. The storm passed, but the snow didn't melt. By morning, Cold Hollow was blanketed in a hushed white silence that stretched for miles. The sun peeked through the pine trees, casting long golden shadows across the snow-covered fields. But inside the cabin, the weight of the night had not lifted. Claire stood at the frosted window, her breath leaving fog on the glass. Ethan was still asleep on the floor beside the couch, Lily curled up against him like a kitten finding warmth. Claire's eyes lingered on them, not out of suspicion anymore, but something softer, something that frightened her more than mistrust. Hope. She stepped back from the window and quietly made coffee, careful not to wake them. The cabin was small, the kitchen little more than an alcove, but she moved with precision, like someone used to silence. She poured 2 mugs, stared at the second one longer than she meant to. He wasn't staying. They weren't staying. It was one night. That was the deal. So why did it feel like they'd always been there? Lily stirred first. She coughed, a shallow crackling sound, but she sat up, blinking at the light. "Where's Daddy?" Claire knelt beside her. "Still asleep. Want some water?" Lily nodded. Claire brought it over, kneeling again. "You feeling better?" The little girl rubbed her eyes. "Cold," she whispered. Claire wrapped the quilt tighter around her. "We've got heat, kiddo. That's more than most people out there right now." Lily looked around. "Is this your house?" Claire hesitated. "Yeah, sort of." "Do you live here alone?" A pause. "I do." "Why?" Claire smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Sometimes people are better off alone." Lily's head tilted, curious. "I don't think so." Before Claire could answer, Ethan stirred behind them. He blinked, sat up, rubbed his face with both hands. "Morning," he croaked. "You look like you wrestled a bear," Claire said. "Maybe I did," Ethan muttered, glancing down at Lily. His voice softened. "You okay, sweetheart?" "I'm cold," she said. "Come here." He lifted her into his lap, holding her tight. "We'll be out of here as soon as I can dig the car out." Claire bit her tongue. She wanted to offer help. She wanted to tell them they could stay a little longer. But she didn't. Because inviting people in meant getting hurt. Again. Still, she asked, "Where exactly were you heading?" "Norwich," he replied. "My mom's got a place near the university." "That's 2 towns over. Back roads will be frozen till spring." "I'll manage." She looked at him. Really looked. The tired eyes, the way he hadn't even asked for help. The same way she'd stopped asking 3 years ago. There was a dignity in that. And a deep, aching loneliness. "You're gonna need help digging out," she said. "I'll figure it out." Claire looked at Lily. The girl's lips were pale. "You won't figure it out fast enough for her," she said. Ethan didn't argue. They spent the next few hours digging the car out of a snowdrift that came up to Ethan's knees. Claire lent him boots 2 sizes too small and a snow shovel with a splintered handle. They worked in silence, side by side, the only sound the scrape of metal against ice and the occasional thud of snow falling from the cabin roof. After a while, Ethan stood upright, breath fogging in the air. "Claire," he said suddenly, Why'd you really let us in? She stopped shoveling. You had a sick kid in your arms. What was I supposed to do? You didn't look like someone who opens doors. I'm not. Then why? She stared at the horizon. Then, very softly, because the last time I didn't open the door, someone died. He turned toward her, but she was already walking back toward the cabin. Inside, Lily was coloring with the stub of a blue crayon. She looked up as they entered. Daddy, can we stay here longer? Ethan crouched beside her. No, sweetheart, we're just stopping over. But I like it here. Claire said nothing. Later that evening, the storm returned. Not with snow this time, but with wind and sleet. The roads iced again. The car wouldn't start. Claire sat by the fire, her mug empty. Ethan paced behind her, frustration showing. Looks like you're stuck, she said without looking up. I can't keep her here. Not like this. She's warm. She's fed. She's safe. But what if something happens? Claire turned. Ethan, everything already happened. You're both still breathing. That's not nothing. He sat, ran his hands through his hair. I don't know how to do this alone. You are doing it. Barely. Still counts. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not cruel. And then, slowly, Ethan said, I wasn't supposed to raise her. That wasn't the plan. Claire waited. My wife, Anna, she was the strong one. The one who knew how to handle fevers and nightmares and birthday parties. I was the guy who worked late and brought home takeout. Then she was gone, and I had no idea who I was without her. Claire swallowed. I know what that's like. I'm afraid I'll mess her up, he whispered. She's loved, Claire replied. That's what matters. And in that moment, something between them shifted. Two broken people leaning into each other, not to fix, but to simply hold. Outside, the snow began again. But inside, for the first time in years, Claire didn't feel cold. The third morning came with a bitter wind and a sky the color of old bruises. The woodpile was down to 4 logs. The generator sputtered twice, then died completely. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and the room, once warm with the pulse of shared breath and hesitant laughter, felt cold again. Not from the air, but from something deeper. Claire stood staring at the hearth, motionless. Her arms were crossed, her expression hollow. She hadn't slept much. Something about last night had scratched at old wounds she thought had long since scabbed over. Behind her, Ethan crouched by the fire, trying in vain to coax a spark from the last kindling. You didn't put any dry wood near the stove last night? He asked gently. She didn't turn. Didn't think we'd need it. It was your last night here. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. I wasn't planning on staying. You still are. That a problem? Claire finally turned. Her eyes held a strange light, sharp, wounded, too tired to hide it. I don't keep guests, she said. I don't do company. That's not what this place is for. It's not like I want to be here, Claire. My daughter's sick. My car's dead. The storms shut every road within 20 miles, trust me. I'd rather be anywhere else. Then go, she said. Take her, walk, freeze, just get out. Ethan stood slowly. Don't say things you don't mean. I don't say anything I don't mean. The silence that followed cracked like ice. Then Lily's voice piped up from the back room, small and unaware. Is the fire gone? Claire's shoulders dropped. Her hand went to her temple like a reflex. She didn't respond. Ethan did. "I'm working on it, sweetheart." Claire looked at him now, not with anger, with something far worse. Regret. She walked past him, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small notebook. Its leather edges were worn smooth from years of being touched, but never opened. She hesitated, then flipped it open. A picture tucked into the second page. A woman in scrubs, smiling. A hospital in the background. A child in her arms. Claire's hand trembled. Ethan noticed. "Who's that?" Claire didn't answer. "Your mom?" Still silence. "You're not just hiding from people out here, are you?" he asked gently. "You're hiding from what happened." Claire finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "That woman was blamed for the death of a child at Brookhaven Medical. A routine tonsillectomy. A child bled out. The media tore her apart, called her careless, irresponsible. She wasn't. She was the head nurse. The surgeon made the error. But when the press came knocking, they needed a scapegoat, a face to blame." Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "She overdosed 3 weeks later," Claire finished, her voice cracked. "After 29 years in the same hospital." He swallowed. "Brookhaven? In Manhattan?" She nodded. His hands dropped to his sides. "What was her name?" Claire's eyes locked onto his. "Margaret Bennett." The name landed between them like thunder. Ethan stepped back. "My daughter," he said slowly, "died at Brookhaven Medical." Claire's face drained of color. "No." "She was 5. Her name was Anna Lily Thorne." "No," Claire said again. "That can't—" "She went in for a routine surgery. They said she bled too fast. There was confusion. No one took responsibility." Claire's mouth parted, her breath gone. "That's why I left Manhattan," Ethan said, his voice growing ragged. "I couldn't breathe in that city anymore. Couldn't look at the hospital, couldn't sit in the silence of my penthouse and wonder how it all went wrong." Claire stared at the floor. "Your daughter—" "My everything." The room swayed. She sat down slowly, notebook still in her hands. "My mother was blamed for her death?" "I don't know. There were reports, lawsuits. Then it went quiet. I never saw faces, only statements, names in legal filings." "She wasn't guilty," Claire said firmly. "She wouldn't have missed something like that. She trained hundreds of nurses. She was the last one to leave a shift. She was human," Ethan finished. The fire flickered, a small flame, finally catching. Lily walked into the room holding her stuffed rabbit. Claire looked up. "I'm cold," the little girl whispered. Claire stood. "Let's fix that." She moved past Ethan, knelt near the fire, fed it the last dry log. The room began to glow again. Amber and quiet. Lily sat down beside her, curling up near the warmth. Ethan sat last. For a while, none of them spoke. Just the sound of breath and burning wood. Then Ethan said softly, "I never knew who to blame, but I blamed everyone anyway." Claire nodded. "And I blamed myself for letting her carry it alone." They looked at each other, not as enemies, not even strangers. Just two people standing in the wreckage of the same explosio. Ethan found the letter tucked inside his coat pocket just after dawn. He was stepping out of the cabin, boots crunching over the frost-bitten snow, when his fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there yesterday. The envelope was weathered but clean. No return address. Just his name. Ethan Thorne, written in a tight, elegant script he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. He stared at it for a long time before unfolding it with numb fingers. His breath turned to steam as he read. Mr. Thorne. They buried the truth because it was easier than justice. Because your grief gave them cover. Because blaming a nurse was simpler than confronting a surgeon's error. I saw it all, and I kept the records. If you still care to know the truth, find me. Room 302, Mount Mercy Retirement Home, Manhattan. E.M.S. Ethan's hands shook. Claire noticed. She'd stepped onto the porch, arms wrapped in a wool blanket. You okay? Ethan didn't answer. He was still reading the last line over and over. They buried the truth. Claire moved closer. What is it? He folded the letter carefully, slid it back into his coat, and turned. Someone knows what really happened. To my daughter. To your mother. Claire's lips parted. Where? Manhattan. She stiffened. You're going? I have to. She turned away, as if the wind had suddenly cut sharper. You think someone's just been sitting on the truth all these years? Waiting? Ethan looked out across the snowy valley. No. I think someone's been carrying it. Like we've carried everything else. Claire didn't respond. Behind them, inside the cabin, Lily was curled up near the fire, drawing again. Stick figures of a man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands in front of a cabin. Ethan saw the drawing and paused. I want her to know her mother, he said softly. Not just the absence, the light she came from, the warmth. Claire looked down. And I want the world to know my mother didn't kill a child. Their eyes met. No accusation, just shared ache. Ethan took a breath. Would you come with me? Claire blinked. What? I don't want to face this alone. She hesitated. It's Manhattan. Everything I ran from is there. He nodded. Me too. Silence. Then Claire looked through the window toward the girl by the fire. She deserves the truth. Ethan's voice was quiet. So do you. She turned back to him. We leave at first light. 2 days later, Manhattan. The city hit them like a train. Noise, lights, motion, all too loud, too fast after the stillness of Cold Hollow. Claire hadn't set foot in Manhattan since her mother's funeral. Her legs trembled when she stepped off the Amtrak platform. Lily held her hand the entire time. Mount Mercy Retirement Home stood like a forgotten promise at the edge of Central Park, its bricks dulled by soot, its windows tired from decades of stories. Room 302 was quiet. Ethan knocked once, then again. No answer. Claire's heart thudded against her ribs. A nurse walked by, recognized the name on Ethan's letter, and said, You just missed her. She passed away in her sleep last night. Ethan's mouth went dry. What? She left something for you, though. The nurse handed over a manila envelope. Said you'd be coming. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and a typed document. At the top, patient records, Anna Lily Thorne, 2018, internal investigation. Claire sat down hard on the bench. Ethan stared at the folder like it might explode in his hands. Someone tried to tell us the truth, he whispered. And now she's gone. He opened the file. Inside were time-stamped records showing the anesthesiologist had left the OR for 6 minutes during Lily's surgery. The nurse's notes, Claire's mother's, were precise, urgent, and panicked. She'd called for help twice. The attending surgeon had dismissed her concerns. There were emails, too. From MS. Margot Sinclair, the former surgical coordinator. She'd tried to report it internally. Had been silenced. Ethan was shaking. "It wasn't your mother." Claire was crying. "And it wasn't just an accident." They sat in stunned silence. Then Ethan said, "We take this public." Claire wiped her face. "We burn it all down." A snowstorm had brought them together. But now something deeper, something that spoke without sound, was pulling the past from its shallow grave. Lily sat quietly in the cafe near Mount Mercy, her fingers smudged with crayon, her small lips pursed in concentration. Around her, papers rustled and tension thickened like fog, but she remained in her world, a world where silence healed and colors told truths adults had long forgotten how to speak. Claire leaned forward, sipping burnt coffee, barely tasting it. Ethan had been combing through the files they'd recovered from the whistleblower's box. Scans, deposition transcripts, a nurse's unsigned letter never sent. It all screamed negligence. But it wasn't enough. Until Lily turned the page, she held it up with the innocent gravity of a child offering a secret. "This is Mommy, and this is the nice nurse who helped her." Claire's heart stopped. The sketch was crude, sure, scrawled with thick strokes and oversaturated hues, but there was no mistaking it. The eyes, the soft brown hair, the floral badge lanyard. "That's my mother," Claire whispered, the words breaking as they left her lips. Ethan looked up, startled. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded. "I have a picture of her from her last day at work. That's the scrubs she wore. Even the freckles. Lily, you remember her?" Lily nodded solemnly. "She held Mommy's hand, told her not to be afraid. She let me stay, even when the other doctor said no." Ethan's hand trembled as he reached for the sketchbook. He stared at it for a long time, longer than he had looked at any document in the past month. "She was with her," he murmured. "Emily wasn't alone." That night, Ethan made a decision. No lawyers, no quiet settlements. He scanned the files and attached Lily's drawing. Then, with shaking hands, he emailed everything to Robert Kingsley, a respected investigative journalist at the New York Ledger. Attached was a single handwritten note. "If this were your daughter, wouldn't you want the truth?" The story broke 2 days later. Sketch by 6-year-old sparks investigation into Mount Mercy malpractice scandal. It went viral in hours. Claire's name surfaced. So did her mother's. Old wounds reopened like fresh incisions. The hospital board released a clipped defensive statement, but the pressure was on. Whispers turned into questions, questions into headlines. And then, a summons arrived. The Manhattan General Medical Ethics Board wanted to meet. 3 weeks later, Claire stood outside their glass building, cold despite the spring wind. Ethan was beside her, his hand protectively hovering near Lily's shoulder. Claire looked down. "Are you sure you want to be here, sweet girl?" Lily looked up, calm and unblinking. "She helped me. Now I help her." The boardroom was large, white, sterile. 5 officials in suits. No warmth, no welcome. But when Lily walked in, clutching her drawing pad like a sacred text, something shifted in the air. She sat in the chair with her feet swinging off the floor, her voice steady. "I saw the nice nurse. Mommy was scared. The nurse said, 'Keep breathing.' She held her hand. She told me not to cry." "Do you know her name?" a doctor asked gently. Lily turned the page and pointed. "That's her. Claire's mommy." She lifted the sketch again. 2 women, one with her arms around a frightened mother, one holding a child. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. Claire choked back a sob as silence flooded the room. Outside, cameras waited. Journalists had gathered like storm clouds. Ethan shielded Lily with his coat. Claire kept her head down. None of them said a word. But the world had already heard. A week later, an official statement was released. We acknowledge that Nurse Evelyn Monroe showed compassion and integrity during the events of March 15, 2018. She is hereby posthumously cleared of all accusations and honored for her service. Claire sat alone on a bench in Central Park when she read it, shaking, the cold of the metal beneath her barely noticed. Ethan approached quietly. He sat down beside her, Lily tucked beneath one arm. "She was always innocent," he said softly. Claire nodded. "I knew it, but now the world knows." They went back to Cold Hollow 2 weeks later. Lily was the first to run into the cabin, throwing her arms wide. "We're home!" Claire blinked. "I thought she meant you're home." Ethan smiled. "Maybe it's both now." That night, while Lily slept upstairs, Ethan pulled a weathered notebook from his bag. "I want you to have this," he said. "It's Emily's." Inside were old recipes, notes, doodles, a list titled, "Names for Lily if it's a girl." Claire traced her fingers over the ink. "She would have liked you," Ethan said. "You see people. You saw me." Claire looked up. "Do you think it's okay to finally stop blaming ourselves?" He paused, then nodded. "I think it's time." The fire crackled. The wind howled gently outside the walls, and inside cabin 12, for the first time in years, 3 broken hearts rested, mending slowly together. They called it the Lion's Table. It was a long slab of American walnut, carved from a single tree and burnished to an almost mirror-like sheen, placed dead center beneath the glass atrium of Thorn Tech's Manhattan headquarters. The table stretched 30 feet long, with sharp edges and silent power. It had seen billion-dollar mergers, hostile takeovers, and Nobel laureates walk its perimeter. But today, it held something different. Claire Monroe sat at its side, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her sat 12 men in dark suits, expressions unreadable, their gazes like well-honed scalpels. A water sculpture hummed in the distance, cool and steady, like a reminder to breathe. Next to Claire, Ethan Thorne sat with the calm of someone who'd spent a decade turning tension into capital. But today his fingers tapped just a little too often against the wood. He leaned toward Claire and murmured, "Don't try to win them over. Just speak the truth. That's all I've asked of you." Claire nodded, but her stomach swirled. She had faced poverty, grief, and loneliness, but never a room like this. Never a table where power was seated and measured in net worth and legal influence. Never a room where her voice had to pierce silence that had cost lives. Ethan straightened, his tone clipped and confident. "Gentlemen," he began, "you've seen the article in the Manhattan Ledger. You've read the preliminary report. Claire Monroe has unearthed evidence tied to the Mount Mercy cover-up. The same cover-up that involved a misdiagnosed child, a scapegoated nurse, and, whether we admit it or not, our own technology pipelines." A stir ran through the room. A silver-haired man with a Yale pin and a tie as stiff as his jaw leaned forward. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "this company is a tech empire. You build systems, not civil cases. What exactly do you want us to do?" Ethan tilted his head toward Claire. "I brought her here because she deserves to be heard, and because some of you may need to decide if our company is about profit or purpose." Claire rose. Her knees were shaking, but she refused to let them buckle. Her voice didn't waver. My name is Claire Monroe. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I have no investors, no degrees from Ivy League institutions. Her eyes scanned the room. But I held my mother's hand the day she was dismissed from Mount Mercy Hospital for something she didn't do. I watched her lose her life not to illness, but to silence. And I've just helped a little girl rediscover what it means to believe in justice. A heavy hush fell. Claire took a step toward the projector and clicked the remote. Slide 1. A hospital log, time-stamped, with an altered entry line. Slide 2. Her mother's original note, never submitted into the formal file. Slide 3. A child's crayon sketch of a red button and a nurse's broken heart. She turned back to the table. You build systems that claim to be neutral, but neutrality has a cost, and sometimes that cost is paid in people like my mother, or like Lily, Ethan's daughter, who might have grown up believing her mother died because someone didn't care enough to look twice. The older men shifted uncomfortably, but Claire didn't yield. I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for collaboration. Fund a task force. Create a pipeline for whistleblowers. Build a system that detects human patterns, not just code. Call it empathy tech. Call it whatever you want. But start. Somewhere. A younger man opened his mouth to object, but a soft voice interrupted from the far end of the table. I lost my sister to a preventable error, said the only woman on the board, M.D. Langston. And I've spent 15 years waiting for someone to speak like this. I support her. Ethan looked at her, quiet gratitude in his eyes. Claire felt it too, a shift, not victory but momentum. But the silver-haired man wasn't finished. You want us to divert millions based on the word of a woman with no credentials and a child's drawing? He said coolly. Claire stepped closer, not in defiance, but in presence. No, she said. I want you to act because it's the right thing. Because every year you delay, someone else like my mother disappears. And because this time the story's already public. You're not deciding whether to help. You're deciding whether to matter. Then she stepped back, gathered her notes, nodded to Ethan and walked out. Head high, shoulders square, heart still pounding. Back at the cabin that evening, the fire was lit again. Ethan handed Claire a mug of peppermint tea and sat beside her in silence. Snow tapped against the window panes like fingers asking to come inside. You were magnificent, he said finally. I was terrified, Claire whispered. He smiled faintly. You didn't show it. She stared at the fire, the logs hissing and glowing. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was speaking for her. For my mom. You were, he said. Claire turned, her voice softer now. Why did you back me up like that? That wasn't just risk, it was sacrifice. Reputation, politics. Ethan looked away, the fire reflecting in his eyes. Because you remind me of Emily, he said, almost inaudibly. Claire froze. Not how you look, he clarified, but how you stand in the middle of fear and still choose to speak. She used to say the only way to fight silence was with stubborn light. Claire felt something ache in her chest, a bridge forming across grief, his and hers, like two matching bruises finally recognizing each other. Outside, the snow no longer seemed heavy. It fell gently now, like memory turned soft. And inside the cabin, warmth bloomed. Not from the fire, but from the presence of two souls no longer alone. From pain, truth, from silence, voice. And from the lion's table, the first spark of change. The first email arrived at 2:17 a.m. Claire almost missed it. She had fallen asleep on the old sofa beside Lily, the girl curled like a kitten beneath one arm, her gentle breaths barely louder than the ticking of the antique wall clock. But when she stirred to pull the blanket higher, the soft ping from Ethan's laptop cut through the silence. Subject line: Re, your mother. She sat up, heart thudding. The sender was anonymous, the message short. You're not the first to dig. You're just the first to survive this long. Watch your back. Follow the money. Start with Henry Vale. She stared at the screen. Henry Vale. The name echoed like a bad chord. It was familiar, not because she knew him, but because he'd been one of the original donors behind Mount Mercy's expansion years ago, a venture capitalist with deep ties to Thorntech's earliest investors. Claire didn't wake Ethan right away. Instead, she spent hours researching by candlelight, her fingers numb from cold, her eyes red from the glow of the screen. By the time Ethan stirred with a groggy, "What time is it?" she had mapped out 3 shell companies, 2 falsified consulting agreements, and a trail that led straight to Thorntech's acquisitions division. When he saw the chart she'd drawn across 6 pages of printer paper and 1 napkin, Ethan didn't speak for a full minute. Then, "You realize this implicates board members." "I realize," Claire said quietly. "I also realize someone tipped me off at 2 a.m. That means someone inside wants this to come out." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This is industrial espionage territory, and you're walking right into it." Claire stood straighter. "I've walked through worse." Ethan's eyes searched hers. "Then let's do it properly. Let's flush them out." What followed was the most calculated week of their lives. Ethan took Claire to Manhattan again, not through the front doors of Thorntech, but through a side entrance, into a quiet room filled with server monitors and legal advisors who owed him old favors. There, they laid the groundwork. Emails sent, keywords planted, meetings arranged. At night, they returned to the cabin. Lily danced between their legs as they cooked dinner on the old stovetop, unaware that her father and Claire were preparing to dismantle something far larger than either had imagined. And yet, for all the strategy, it was not the plan that made the chapter unforgettable. It was what happened on the 3rd day, when Ethan received an unmarked envelope delivered by courier to the cabin porch. Inside, a single Polaroid photograph. His late wife, Emily, holding Lily as a newborn, in what looked like a hospital parking garage. The date written in faint ink, March 17th, 2019. That was 2 weeks after Emily had been declared dead. Ethan went white. Claire reached for his hand. What does this mean?" He shook his head, voice brittle. "I don't know, but if this photo is real, someone lied to me about the day she died." They rushed back to Manhattan that night. This time, they didn't go to the glass conference rooms or the data floors. Ethan took Claire to the sub-level archives of Thorntech, through layers of badge locks and retinal scans, to a vault he hadn't opened in over 4 years. Inside, file boxes lined metal walls, contracts, medical partnerships, grants, and tucked behind a row of obsolete drives, something that made Claire go cold. A file marked, "Emily Thorne, do not index." Inside, surveillance photos, unsigned medical release forms, and worst of all, a single post-mortem report with a redacted signature. Claire exhaled slowly. "Ethan, this wasn't a death. This was a removal." Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the concrete like a warning. The storm had found them again. But this time they weren't hiding. They were walking straight into it. That night, Ethan made one more call. Not to a lawyer, not to a board member, to M.D. Langston, the board's lone voice of empathy, the same woman who had lost her sister in a hospital scandal and who had quietly backed Claire 2 weeks ago. Her voice crackled over the line. "You're sure about this?" Ethan's reply was simple. "I'm done covering for the Lions." Langston agreed to meet them in secret the next morning. When Claire and Ethan arrived, she was already there, waiting in a bookstore cafe in Soho, surrounded by shelves of quiet stories and old dust. Langston poured them tea and locked the door behind them. "I always suspected Henry Vale," she whispered. "He was the one who pushed for hospital data integration without oversight. And he's the one who made your mother disappear, Claire." Claire blinked. "You knew?" Langston shook her head. "I guessed, but I was a coward. Until now." They laid out everything. The anonymous email, the shell companies, the photograph of Emily with Lily post-mortem. Langston listened, her fingers steepled. Then she said, "It's time we invite the Lions to dinner. All of them." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. Langston smiled grimly. "We leak just enough. We bait them. Make them think Claire is going to testify on record and that you, Ethan, are going to back her in court. Then we watch who tries to stop it. That's your lion." Claire looked at Ethan. He looked back and nodded. The setup had begun. As they left the bookstore into the wet Manhattan dusk, Claire paused at the crosswalk. Ethan turned. "What is it?" Claire looked up at him, hair damp with drizzle, eyes clearer than ever. "If this gets bad, really bad, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't protect me." He flinched. "Claire, I don't need a shield. I need a partner." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we burn this system down together." And for the first time, she believed him. Not just the CEO, not just the grieving father, but the man beside her. The snow had melted in Manhattan, but the fire had only just begun. The boardroom at Thorntech's Manhattan headquarters had always been a place of power. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows gazing over the skyline, a 16-foot mahogany table polished like a mirror, and chairs once reserved for billionaires, governors, and visionaries. But that morning, it felt more like a courtroom. Claire sat at the far end, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, flanked by Ethan and M.D. Langston. On the wall behind them, a screen flickered quietly, waiting. In front of them, 12 board members, some pale, some smug, all wary. Henry Vale entered last. He walked in slowly, like he owned the oxygen in the room. Armani suit, pale blue tie. He nodded once to Ethan, ignoring Claire altogether, and took his seat at the head of the table. "I hear," he said dryly. "We're here for a little story time." Ethan leaned forward. "We're here for the truth." Vale smiled, leaning back. "Then by all means, Mr. Thorne, entertain us." Claire's throat felt tight. But she stood. She spoke softly at first, her voice wavering, not out of fear, but from the weight of the moment. She spoke of her mother, a nurse with 28 years of service, framed for negligence in the death of a child at Mount Mercy Hospital. She told them about the sudden disappearance of the child's medical records, the forged incident reports, and the media smear that followed. But then, she did what none of them expected. She tapped a button on Ethan's tablet, and the screen behind them came to life with a video feed, not a slide, not a graphic, a live video of a woman sitting in a private hospital bed in Oregon. Her face was thinner, her hair cut short, but unmistakable. Emily Thorne, alive. There was a gasp in the room. Henry Vale's smirk cracked. Claire's voice didn't falter. "This is Emily Thorne, presumed dead in 2019, mourned by her husband, buried by her family. Except she wasn't dead. She was moved, sedated, hidden in a private neurological ward controlled by a Vale subsidiary under the guise of traumatic brain death." Ethan stood beside her now. She was left in a chemically induced coma while Vale's team falsified her death certificate, so they could close the malpractice case quietly, remove all evidence, and rewrite the narrative. The board erupted, some shouting, some frozen. Vale's hands stayed flat on the table. "You don't have proof." Langston stepped forward and dropped a thick file in front of him. Bank transfers, offshore payments, authenticated timestamps, testimony from the head nurse in Oregon, who had come forward under federal protection that very morning. "Now we do," Langston said. And then Claire delivered the final blow. She held up a photograph, a grainy image, blown up on the screen. Claire's mother, Mary Bennett, walking out of Mount Mercy on the day of the child's death. Behind her, two men in scrubs, wheeling a gurney covered in a child-sized sheet. On the bottom corner of the gurney, visible even in the low resolution, a hospital ID tag. Lily Thorne. Ethan stopped breathing. He stepped closer. "That's not possible. Lily died after the car accident. She wasn't—" Claire turned to him, heart pounding. "Your daughter didn't die at Mount Mercy, Ethan. She was moved. She was already ill. Your wife tried to protect her, but the hospital needed a scapegoat. My mother. And when she refused to falsify records, Vale buried her." Ethan's face went white. "Then, who was in the car with me that day?" Claire took his hand. "I think you know." It all came rushing back, a buried memory in Ethan's mind, locked beneath trauma and years of grief. The other little girl, the nanny he'd hired at the hospital's urging, her disappearance, the cremation he'd never questioned, a name formed on his lips. Madeline. Claire nodded. The daughter of a Vale executive. They switched the records, switched the files, and when your car crashed, they let you believe your Lily had died, so you'd never look back. Ethan turned to Vale. His voice shook with something deeper than rage, a kind of grief that could set buildings on fire. "You stole my child." Vale didn't deny it. He simply stood, straightened his tie, and said, "And yet you still built an empire off the wreckage. You're welcome." That was when Ethan lunged. Security rushed in, dragging him back. Claire held him tightly, whispering, "Not like this. Not now. We win the right way." And they did. 3 hours later, federal agents arrived, warrants in hand. Vale was escorted out in handcuffs. 2 board members resigned on the spot. Langston was appointed interim chair. And Claire, the girl from Cabin 12, daughter of a disgraced nurse, was offered a formal apology from the Thorne Tech Board of Ethics, live on camera. But none of it mattered as much as what happened that night. When Claire and Ethan returned to Cold Hollow, Lily ran to them in the snow, laughing. Ethan scooped her up, kissed her cheeks, held her tighter than he ever had. He whispered into her ear, "Daddy's never letting you go again." And Claire, standing there in the doorway, wrapped in a sweater too big and a piece too small to name, watched them both. She was no longer just the woman who sheltered them. She was family. And tomorrow, they would go back to where it all began. They returned to Cold Hollow in the spring, not for closure, but for beginning. The snow had melted, leaving the pine needles exposed and the old trail muddy underfoot. The cabin still creaked in the same places. The firewood still leaned awkwardly by the door. But everything had changed. Because this time Ethan carried no silence in his chest. Claire stood on the porch, barefoot, laughing as Lily chased a monarch butterfly across the clearing. She was taller now, stronger. Her hair fell in loose waves, and her giggle no longer had that hollow note it once did, that ache of a child grieving what she couldn't name. Ethan stepped beside Claire, his arm brushing hers, and for a moment neither of them said anything, just breathing in the same air. "I never thought I'd come back here," Claire said. "And yet," he smiled, "you never really left." Inside the cabin, the table from that first night was still there, polished now, no longer cracked. Claire had replaced the curtains. Ethan had wired solar power. There were 3 sleeping bags rolled by the fireplace, though Lily had long outgrown hers. They'd kept them, just in case. That morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox nailed to the tree. The very tree where Ethan had once scratched "Thank you" into the bark with a penknife. It was from Mount Mercy Hospital. An official document, signed and sealed. A posthumous exoneration of Nurse Mary Bennett. Claire read it out loud, her hands trembling. A full legal clearing. The hospital board had reopened the case under pressure from public outcry and congressional review. Her mother's name, after 6 years of silence, had been restored. "She would have wanted to be here," Claire whispered. "She is," Ethan said. They buried the letter beneath the maple tree where Claire used to sit and write in her journal. Lily helped dig the hole. When it was done, she whispered something into the dirt and covered it with her small hand. Then she turned to Claire and asked, "Can I call you Mommy now?" Claire didn't answer right away. Tears had made her too soft to speak. So she knelt and held Lily close, not like a woman pretending to mother, but like a soul recognizing its own. "Yes," she finally whispered. "You always could." Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, Ethan unpacked a wooden box from the back of the truck. It had been sealed for 6 years, the last of Emily's journals. Her voice, her drawings, her letters to Lily, never sent. He laid them out on the table one by one. Claire read them softly. Lily colored beside her. And Ethan, for the first time since the accident, felt peace press against his ribcage, not as grief, but as grace. That night, they lit the fire again. No storm outside, no desperation, just the soft hush of wind through trees, the scent of pine sap, and the rhythm of 3 heartbeats learning to dance in time. "I used to think legacy was the company," Ethan murmured. Claire tilted her head. "And now?" He looked around the cabin, at the girl who called him Dad, at the woman who called him back to life, at the home that healed more than one wound. "Now I think legacy is who shows up when it matters." They stayed at the cabin for 3 more weeks. Together they planted wildflowers along the ridge. Claire taught Lily how to bake bread without a recipe. Ethan carved a bench from a fallen log, inscribing the words, "Home isn't found, it's made." And when they finally left Cold Hollow, they didn't lock the door. Because some places aren't meant to be locked. They're meant to be returned to. Like memories, like people, like love.